It's Monday, it's 12:15 and we're live at the Conservative Party conference in Birmingham.
I've had 3 children, I've had maternity leave 3 times. I don't need anyone to tell me about maternity pay. I've been one of the people fighting for that. I don't think it needs changing at all.
Tory leadership contender Kemi Badenoch insists she does support maternity pay. And she doubles down on her view that not all cultures are equal.
Which cultures, in your view, are less valid than others?
Oh, lots. Cultures that believe in child marriage, for instance, or that women don't have equal rights.
The trap to fall into, and it is a trap, is to think that as people get fed up with the Labour government, to assume that they will automatically come back to us.
And a warning about complacency from the Shadow Chancellor. Joining me today, 2 political editors, The Spectator's Katie Balls and The Guardian's Pippa Crerar, Conservative MP and Kemi Badenoch supporter Andrew Bowie, and former Boris Johnson advisor Samuel Kasumu. This is Politics Live. Yes, welcome to Birmingham, where it is all about the leadership contest and the 4 candidates, the hopefuls who want to replace Rishi Sunak. Now, even if members gathered here and MPs haven't themselves seen the candidates in person, you certainly can't miss the very long, large banners that are hanging over the exhibition hall. And in no particular order, you can see them all here: Robert Jenrick and James Cleverly, Kemi Badenoch, and also Tom Tugendhat. Now, there are 2 more rounds for MPs to go to whittle down the 4 candidates who are making their pitches this week to the party faithful at conference. 2 more rounds until they have 2 candidates who will then go before the membership. And we'll be talking to supporters of the 4 campaigns over the next few days. Just to give you an idea of where the candidates are in terms of MP support at the last round, Robert Jenrick, who was a former immigration minister, topped the poll with 33 votes. Then it was Kemi Badenoch, who had been seen and has been seen as the front runner with 28 votes. Then the Shadow Home Secretary, James Cleverly, and Tom Tugendhat tied on 21. So when we look ahead to who will replace Rishi Sunak eventually, because it will be announced on November the 2nd, starting with you, Katie, will one of these candidates take the Tory party into the next election?
Well, it's funny walking around this conference because there are some Tory MPs here who are saying, privately of course, but I'm not throwing my weight too heavily behind any candidate because we know we're going to be back here in 2 years, and that's when I'll really pick the winner. And that's one of the messages. I mean, I think there is a chance they lead them into the next election, and certainly the mood here, I think because some of Labour's troubles, it feels way more positive than you would expect the party to feel after a historic loss. It might be a false sense of positivity. They might be actually getting a bit ahead of themselves. But I think more thinking that perhaps there is a path to going all the way.
Right. You're not the first person to say it feels more positive than perhaps people might have expected. But do you think one of these candidates will actually lead the Conservative Party into the next general election?
I think it depends who it is. And I'd actually say on the positivity point that it feels actually more like denial to me. That we still don't have, even wandering around back at Westminster, there still seems to be this sense among lots of former ministers that they kind of somehow are entitled to be in charge. This is a temporary break. The Labour Party have come in. They'll just have it a few years, and then, of course, the country will see sense and will vote them back again. And, of course, as Jeremy Hunt has warned, you can't be complacent. And I fear that some of that positivity kind of verges a little bit close to complacency. When I say about, I think, whoever wins the contest, it depends whether they last until the next election. I think that a couple of the candidates are much more sort of focused on and have a much more natural inclination to unite. And then there are those that perhaps are more of a risk, or would be more of a risk for the Conservative Party. So Kemi Badenoch, for example, I think that while many of her supporters in particular can see that she's a great communicator, that she's not afraid of saying what she thinks, that she really is a very attractive proposition to many of the Conservative members, they're also afraid, they see her as a risk and think that she could explode at any point. I think conference so far has shown us what can happen.
Are you in denial?
No, absolutely not.
Is it delusional to be so positive as it seems to be amongst the bars and the conference conference centre here.
Well, no, I mean, there is a buzz about conference, there's no doubt about that, but I think that speaks more to the fact that we know what we have to do. You know, this is the beginning of the conversation that we as a party need to have about how we are in a position in a few years' time to be an attractive proposition to the British people as their next government. So we know where we are. We suffered a huge defeat just a few short months ago, but I wouldn't say it was positivity, it's more, I think, determination. And I think the excitement about the leadership election, I think the debate that we're having about policy, the direction this party needs to take, the vision for the country. We've seen what Labour's vision for the country is, and frankly, I don't think many of the British people quite expected it to be what it is. And so we now have the opportunity to develop a proposal, a policy platform, choose a leader that can really connect with the British people. And I think that's why there's a buzz around conference. I
mean, you're supporting Kemi Badenoch.
Yeah.
Do you think if she wins, she will lead the Tory party into the next election?
I think she should win, and I think she will lead us into the next election.
Samuel, do you? Not necessarily Kemi Badenoch, but whoever is successful.
That is a good question. Probably. I think there are 121 members of Parliament. That isn't that many. I think the party's probably in the process of going through its various stages of grief. I think Labour, it took at least 9 years for them to finally get to the point where they realise that you need to have a relatively broad tent if you're going to win an election. I don't think most of my Conservative colleagues are there just now.
Right. I mean, in terms of speeding it up, by the way, I have heard discussion, but it is pretty set in stone. Do you think they might bring it forward, the announcement of who's what? No, you don't. No. Even to have someone facing Rachel Reeves at the budget.
I think there's logistical problems now in doing it. I think there is a frustration that the various camps, maybe some who are now publicly saying they would like it to be a shorter contest, were not in favour of this initially, and there is regret. But I think the view of CCHQ is it's now maybe too hard to do. At least that's the current thinking.
Right, you think
yeah, and it's a big. I mean, the budget is potentially a big political moment for whoever wins the contest that they're now not going to have. There's the media attention on it. There's sort of setting the tone of whatever the opposition is going to look like going forward. It does feel like a bit of an error, but I think at this point it's too hard to go back on it.
Well, let's talk about Kemi Badenoch, since we have Andrew Bowie here, and her comments about maternity pay. Those comments have been criticised by the three other candidates in the race. Let's first look at this exchange with Kemi Badenoch on Times Radio yesterday morning.
Do you think we've got the right level of maternity pay at the moment?
So maternity pay varies depending on who you work for, but it is a function, where it's statutory maternity pay, it is a function of tax. Tax comes from people who are working. We're taking from one group of people and giving to another. This, in my view, is excessive. Businesses are closing. Businesses are not starting in the UK because they say that the burden of regulation is too high.
So maternity pay is excessive?
I think it's gone too far the other way in terms of general business regulation. We need to allow businesses, especially small businesses, to make more of their own decisions. The exact amount of maternity pay, in my view, is neither here nor there. We need to make sure that we are creating an environment where people can work and people can have more freedom to make their individual decisions.
Well, it's here nor there for people who can't afford to have a baby, isn't it?
We need to have more personal responsibility. There wasn't any maternity pay and people were having more babies. We need to make sure.
Well, that's because women often had to not work. They had to stay at home. So is that the solution?
You're putting words in my mouth. The point I'm making, Kate, is that we have got to a point where government isn't working anymore and it's tinkering everywhere.
So that was leadership contender Kemi Badenoch yesterday morning. Let's take a look at what she said yesterday evening when the BBC caught up with her.
I wasn't talking about maternity leave at all. I was talking about business regulations. And this is one of the reasons why I say it's important that we listen to what people are saying. I think the journalist interrupted and it was confused what people thought was being answered. I was giving a long answer on business regulations. I've been a Minister for Women and Equalities. I've had 3 children. I've had maternity leave 3 times. I don't need anyone to tell me about maternity pay. I've been one of the people fighting for that, and I won't have my views misrepresented.
So you don't think that she's changing?
No, I don't think it needs changing at all.
Andrew Bowie, do you agree with what Kemi Badenoch said yesterday morning or yesterday evening?
Look, Kemi's absolutely clear. She supports...
Well, which bit? In the morning or in the evening, when she said maternity pay is excessive or that it shouldn't change?
She's been very, very clear. Maternity pay is here to stay, and she supports that. She has benefited from that, being a working mother of 3 whilst she has been in Parliament. Look, people are willfully misrepresenting what
They're not
Kemi
willfully
is saying.
representing.
No, they are.
Let me just remind you, we played the whole piece
Yes.
so that nobody could say that we'd taken it out of context or misquoted. She says maternity pay varies depending on who you work for, but it is a function. Where it is statutory maternity pay, it is a function of tax. Tax comes from people who are working. We're taking from one group of people and giving to another. This, in my view, is excessive. Her words.
Look, she was talking about overall business regulation.
No, she was talking about maternity
the cost
pay.
of doing business in this country, which everybody agrees, even the Labour Party agree, is too excessive. There's too much red tape. We need to encourage businesses to grow. We need to reduce the cost of doing business here in this country. But she absolutely supports statutory maternity leave.
Yeah, but she
has
said it's
benefited from
excessive.
it herself. And I think the willful misrepresentation of her comments by other leadership candidates speaks more to their insecurity and where they are in this leadership
What about
contest.
in response to my question, which is it excessive or not?
No, it's not excessive.
Right. So you agree with what she said yesterday evening. She started her leadership campaign, Kemi Badenoch, by saying that the state should do fewer things. Now she's come up with something, to give her due, that the state should stop doing, scrapping or at least reducing maternity pay. And now, well, hang on, and now she's reversed her position. Why she reversed it?
Well, she didn't reverse her position. She's always been in favour of statutory maternity pay.
No, but reducing
that it is. No, look.
She
Kemi
said
has
it's
been very
excessive,
clear.
so therefore it's too much. Why did she change her position?
She didn't change her position. One thing you need to know about Kemi is that she does not. She is a conviction politician, and you see is what you get. Kemi supports statutory maternity pay. What we do need to do is have a conversation about the cost of doing business here in this country. That was what Kemi was attempting to do yesterday morning. And as I said, the fact that other leadership candidates are misconstruing, misinterpreting her words as a result of her being the members' favourite, her being ahead in every poll of Conservative Party members, their own insecurities about where they are in the leadership election speaks more to them than it does to her.
Sorry. Yesterday, Rishi Sunak called for all parliamentarians and members to be unified and to be singing off the same hymn sheet. And now you're saying that Kemi's words are being misconstrued by other leadership candidates. The reality is, in the UK today, we have an ageing population. We have low child birth rates. We have primary schools being closed all over the country. And bluntly, the idea that you should somehow give people less maternity pay is for the best. Now, I'm not saying Kemi said that, but there are 2 points that Kemi tried to drive home, which I think she probably articulated in a bad way. One was small businesses are struggling. Yes, they're still recovering from the pandemic, closing, struggling to open, etc. And so you need to be in an environment where businesses can thrive. Completely agree with that. The other was completely ideological. This idea that somehow we need a smaller state, we need to do less, etc., is dogmatic. That is not where the UK is at. You could argue, and we can argue, that things are not working in this country. Public services need reform. And yes, maybe we should do less. But the reality is, if we get too ideological as a Conservative Party, we are not going to win in 5 years' time. And that is exactly what we heard. Yes, we didn't hear ideas.
We heard the only person coming up with any ideas is Kemi Badenoch. She's the only person I'd be speaking about this party conference.
All 4 of the candidates have had interesting ideas. Some ideas worse than others. But the reality is, if we have 5 years of complaining about the HRC, trying to argue that somehow the state is going to become smaller if we get back in power in 5 years' time, we are going to lose in 5 years. That is a fact.
Is she too ideological?
No, absolutely not. She's not. She's a realist. And she demonstrated that in government time and time again. Every single job she held in government, she delivered it.
But just answer this question. Why are you blaming the other candidates for Kemi misspeaking? It is okay as a political leader to articulate yourself and get some things wrong and say, look, I maybe should have said this in a different way.
Because
there's a difference between that and saying that the 3 other leadership candidates are somehow misconstrued in her words, which they are not.
But they are. I mean,
Did you listen to Rishi Sunak's speech yesterday?
Absolutely. So that's why
do you think you're doing the right thing today by saying that the other leadership candidates are the ones to blame for Kemi saying something that she now regrets she said?
But they are. I mean, if you look at Robert Jenrick yesterday, 3 times he misinterpreted Kemi's words. 3 times he tried to undermine her position on many issues. So I think it ill behoves them, actually. They need to look to themselves as to why they are doing that. And I do agree with Rishi. We do need to come together after this leadership election. But this is going to be a conversation about ideas and ideals, and then we bring the party together.
But we did all see. We did all see exactly what Kemi Badenoch said in one interview and then what she said later on. Has she changed her position?
I think Samuel's right. I think she probably misspoke, and I think it's not about the other candidates causing her trouble. I mean, literally everyone in the media, from the Telegraph splashed it on the front page. It took that. It read her comments in that way. We obviously put on our front page. There was no discrepancy amongst the media as to what her comments meant. But I think it's okay for politicians to say, actually, that's not quite what I meant. I got it wrong. I think what this speaks to, though, and the problem for Kemi on this, is less about actually the substantive issue of maternity leave and more about the fact that her instinctive reaction is to kind of to fight it out, to tough it out. It's not my fault, it's their fault. It's the rival candidates, it's the media. I've been misconstrued. And we've seen this time and time again. And that's what many Conservative MPs are worried about with her, that when she's in a pickle, she'll fight her way out. And it's not necessarily something which is going to work if the party wants to disprove the theory that the vast majority of the public seem to have about them, which is that they're more obsessed with infighting and chaos than anything else.
How damaging is it?
I think it's a really unhelpful start for Kemi Badenoch on the first, full day of the conference, which was Sunday, and it is a crunch conference. This is going to be so decisive, and it was a really messy exchange. I do agree with Andrew in the sense Kemi Badenoch is not the type of character who would wake up one morning and say, statutory maternity pay way, way too high, and then change her position 3 hours later because someone told her to. But I think the way she spoke about it was, she was trying to link it to a wider argument. It didn't cross very well, and then I agree with Pippa. The sense of then, in clarifying, the reason that all the papers, and including the Spectator, have written about it, is not because Robert Jenrick's camp are going around saying something. It's because we're all seeing a video clip. So I think it is just adding to what will stop Kemi Badenoch getting to the final two, if she is stopped, which lots of camps would like her to be, is the sense that she is a bit too much of a live wire and unpredictable. And that's why yesterday's situation, I think, is unhelpful to her.
Just to explain here, you can see the former Conservative Prime Minister, Liz Truss, here at conference. She's obviously just arrived. She's in a question and answer session somewhere here in the conference and exhibition hall. We'll be listening to that, and we can bring you anything that she says, which may be interesting or contributing. Oh, right. Oh, well, there you go. There's the response immediately from this side of the panel. Samuel, in terms of the Conservatives wanting lower taxes, is Kemi Badenoch right to go back to the principle that you need to come up with examples then of what the state should stop doing?
Yeah, I think the reality is in the UK today, there is the desire for American-style taxation and European-level public services. Now, that tension will always play itself out because our politicians are just not brave enough to have that honest conversation. I personally think that it's going to be very difficult in the next 5 to 10 years to reduce taxation in a way that is tangible for the man on the street. Because we're still recovering from a pandemic, because we still have public services that are just nowhere near the level of standard that people desire, and because we have so many structural challenges that politicians are just not brave enough to tackle. And so, yeah, we'd all love to pay less tax, but if we're all being honest about the situation, the economic situation we're in, that is probably not going to come. The last thing I would say on this is that we never speak enough about the fact that we have a demographic time bomb. And that's linked to some of what Kemi said. Yesterday, we're having less babies, we're all living longer, and it's costing more. Where is that money going to come from? Nobody wants to have that conversation, and so politicians of all colours continue to lie to the public about what the art of the possible is, and that for me is the biggest issue, and
do you want to
the
respond to
saddest
that?
to see.
Especially on the issue of politicians not being honest about the situation.
Well, I think one of the things that we achieved when Rishi was Prime Minister was to, well, we were brutally honest with the British people. Of course we wanted to reduce taxes. All Conservatives believe ultimately in a lower cost to the taxpayer.
The lack of honesty that Sam's talking about is that you can't.
Well,
and you didn't.
And we didn't. And we got criticised for that. But we were honest with the British people. We couldn't afford to cut taxes at the level that we would have liked to because of the situation we were in recovering from the pandemic, in prioritising reducing inflation. And, we are not far removed from that position today. The current government are going to have to take some difficult decisions
on
as well.
Labour, sorry, I had my Weetabix today.
You're good.
So with Labour, exactly the same, for the avoidance of doubt. During the election, so many promises about no taxing on working people, rising, etc. The reality is that is not going to be a line that can hold, and we'll find out in the autumn that people are going to pay more.
As we know, the budget is coming up on October the 30th. Let's talk about something else that Kemi Badenoch has said. She certainly has been making the headlines. Not all cultures equally valid, she says. This is an article in which she was interviewed, and she said that not all cultures are equally valid when it comes to deciding who should be allowed into the UK. We cannot be naive and assume immigrants will automatically abandon ancestral ethnic hostilities at the border, or that all cultures are equally valid. Which cultures in particular are not equally valid?
Well, look, Kemi gave some examples yesterday. If you believe that women shouldn't have equal rights, if you condone female genital mutilation, if you support the idea of child marriage, they are not cultures that have any place in British society. So she's absolutely right. Some cultures are more equal than others.
And how does that play
respect.
out in policy? How would that actually manifest itself in policy?
We're not. Kemi's setting out ideas right now. Her whole pitch to renew 2030 is to take the next few years to develop policy. There's no point in us making policy in 2024 to deal with questions which are going to arise in 2027 and 2028. But this is showing a direction of travel that she wants to take the party and the country on.
Yeah,
and it's a conversation
but what
that we
is
need
that
to
direction?
have.
What does it look like, though, in practical terms? I mean, if you make a bold statement, like saying not all cultures are the same, some are less valid, less valuable, people want to know how that will play out.
Well,
let's say when a border patrol officer...
If you don't believe that that gay men have equal rights, if you don't believe that women have equal rights, if you believe, as I said, in female genital mutilation, you should know that you do not have a place in British society.
Right.
That's absolutely clear.
So, you know, Saudi Arabia, #1 producers of oil in the world. Should we work with Saudi? Should we encourage them to come and invest in Britain? London, the capital of England, 2/3, or the second largest landowner is the Qataris. Should we work with folks from Qatar?
We're not imposing our culture on other countries, but we're talking about British culture in this country. Should we allow people from Qatar
and Saudi to come and invest, own our land, have citizenship, have entrepreneur visas, etc.?
Well, obviously, but what we don't want is elements...
Yes or no?
Obviously, we want them to come and invest in this country.
Okay,
but what
so
we don't want is elements
careful.
of culture
that's why we have laws.
no place
that's
in
why we have, That's why we have laws that people need to subscribe to if they come and live here. The reality is you have to be very careful. I think who Kemi was talking about, and let's just be blunt, are Muslims. Because Muslims, for folks on the centre-right, are always an easy target.
Let's
just be honest about that.
No.
Let's be honest about that.
Absolutely not true.
Well, who is she talking about? Because
I've already set out,
Samuel's brought up.
Hang
on, because one of the things she did also refer to was about people's views on Israel. So would a border patrol officer be asking everyone at Heathrow Airport about their views on Israel?
Well, no, but I think what she, again, made clear yesterday was it is very disturbing to see the rise in anti-Semitism, the rise in hate towards that country, a situation where posters of missing children are being ripped down in the streets of London. I mean, that's an appalling situation to be in.
British nationals are also doing that.
Absolutely.
Folks who were born in this country.
Yes, and we have to have a conversation about why that is as well. I'm not saying here with all the solutions. Well, no, but we need to do much more.
But the point here is
education.
you have to be very careful. You know, I used to work in Downing Street. Ministers used to always come with really interesting lines, and we'd also say, well, have you really thought about this? Have you unpacked the consequences of the words that you might choose to take? And so if you want to be leader of the opposition, you have to be very responsible with how you articulate certain positions.
Absolutely.
And also, you cannot just say things because they're going to get headlines. Because you can if you're in opposition, to be fair. But the reality is, I'm looking for a leader, and I don't think I'm going to find this in this particular leadership contest, to be honest, but I'm looking for a leader that actually is keen to inspire unity within this country. The reality is this country looks very different to what it looked like 70-odd years ago when the Empire would rush arrived on the docks of Tilbury. It will look very different in the next 5 to 10 years. The largest and the fastest growing population is the Muslim population in this country. And so you can't start picking fights with populations that are going to grow even if you shut the borders today. I'm not saying Kemi's doing that, but I'm saying as a
to this country.
Well done for Kemi. Yeah. But I'm saying as a Conservative party, we have to be very careful about what we say, because in 5 or 10 years' time, those people that are being demonized are going to be the ones who determine whether or not we have the privilege of ever having power, because they are the growing demographics.
I don't disagree.
Well, let me give you another example, because you went on to say you'd knock on doors, no doubt during an election campaign, you see somebody at the door who says, oh, I can't speak to you, I will get my husband. Now, there will be British women, probably, who say, on occasion, I'm deferring to my husband on politics. Are they less valid than people arriving here who do that or who are here already?
No, absolutely not. But what we have to make absolutely clear is that in this country there is equality under the law and that women have equal rights in terms of getting involved in the political process as men do. That is not the case in some cultures across the world. And what we have to make absolutely crystal clear to those people who want to come to this country is that if you're coming to this country, you have to abide and associate with the culture that we have.
How do you do that? How do you do that?
I think it's also a consistent theme in this contest. You have Robert Jenrick talking about, tearing the fabric of what makes England and things. So I think, Kemi Badenoch is not the only candidate who I think you can question how they're going to unify or what their approach is on that.
Right. Well, obviously, Andrew being here, Kemi Badenoch, but we will ask similar questions of the other candidates. Thank you to both of you because you are leaving us seamlessly while I turn and talk to Katie and Pippa. But just generally on that whole discussion, do you think it is going to be, again, damaging to her campaign or maybe promoting it?
I think there's the here and there's a now and there's the longer term. And the now is about winning over the Conservative Party. And actually what the root of her comments was having a conversation about immigration. And that is the top concern among many Conservative members. So the audience, her remarks were very specifically aimed at that audience. And so from that point of view, they will probably be, may go down well in some quarters. I think the longer term picture, they're problematic because, as Samuel suggested, a leader of the opposition, a senior politician, has to be about uniting the country, which is already fractured, rather than dividing it. And it feels like she in particular, of all the candidates, is the one that would be the most divisive. And again, we're thinking about how the Conservative MPs view this. Many of them are very uncomfortable about that.
KG?
I think if on Sunday we'd all been staying talking about that op-ed and talking about different cultures, her team would be much happier with how their Sunday went. This is a conversation they wanted to have. They didn't want to talk about childcare. That was one that they accidentally fell into, a self-forced error. And I think that it is, you look at, for example, immigration, how it's a rising voter concern. You look at the threat from reform. I think it's a conversation, it's not just with the members. I think in terms of, it's very complicated bringing back your entire coalition. And there are lots of debates to be had on it. But I also think in terms of voters, it's one where I think they need to maybe show a bit of leg as a crass way to put it. But what do you do to try and get some of those voters back?
Well, let's welcome our other two guests who have come onto the set. Harriet Cross, Conservative MP, backing Tom Tugendhat, who is the Shadow Security Minister, and former Cabinet Minister Justine Greening. Welcome back to Politics Live. Can I start with you, Justine, with something that Jeremy Hunt has said today? He told members in Birmingham, the Shadow Chancellor, the trap to fall into, and it is a trap, is to think that as people get fed up with the Labour government, and judging by the last 12 weeks, that's starting to happen far more quickly than people were expecting, is to assume that they will automatically come back to us. Is he right?
Correct, absolutely right, yeah. I think the party faces a real challenge because it's in political no man's land strategically. It's not really an effective opposition at the moment. It's not certainly being a constructive opposition. The challenge is that actually, for the leadership race, it could end up just simply slipping into being even more of a party of protest, and it will lose that role against reform. So I think it has to tack back to the mainstream, and I think possibly that's what Jeremy Hunt's talking about.
Well, just to go a little bit further, we'll show a tweet. It's from The Guardian, from you. There it is on the screen. The Conservative Party must face the reality of its worst ever general election result. And as you've just said, tack back to being a party of the mainstream. It needs a sense of purpose about what it is for, not just what it is against. Where does the strategy need to be? Is it too much focus on voters who went for reform at the last election?
Absolutely. And most people did not vote for reform. Most people did not vote for the Conservatives. We got a record low 23.7% of the vote. No party has got less than 30% as a Conservative Party before now. So we have to tack back to the mainstream. I think we have to acknowledge just how devastating this defeat was as well, Jo. And it's only really once we've done that we can move forward. But I think the problem I see at the moment is leadership contenders who are simply just offering up the manifesto policies that people have just told them they didn't want. And so that is obviously a recipe for disaster.
Right, is that a mistake, Harriet? That's what Tom Tugendhat is doing. Just offering up what you've just lost the election over.
I don't believe Tom's doing that at all. It's what we need to do is actually find the common ground, what the British public are talking about, are interested in, and want us to deliver on. And I mean, Tom believes that across the board, whether you're sort of on the right side of conservatism, towards the centre of conservatism, what we need to find is where the majority of Conservatives sit relative to the majority of the population, because that's where you win an election from, and that's what the British people want us to be speaking about, because that's what they are worrying
Well, let's
about.
just give some examples of what Tom Tugendhat and his so-called manifesto, if you like, for his leadership campaign, cutting net immigration to 100,000, saying he's willing to leave the European Convention on Human Rights and wants defence spending to rise to 3% of GDP. Is he falling into the trap that Justine has just described?
Well, if we take the ECHR, Tom has first wrote in 2013 about the need to reform the ECHR or our relationship with it. So this is not something that he's jumped onto just for this leadership campaign. And again, it's nothing to do about throwing red meat here, there or anywhere. It's about what's actually important. The ECHR, as with any international convention, must be there to serve the interests of the British people. And if it's not doing that, then we need to reform it. And in terms of the ECHR, what we need in terms of, and the impact of that on immigration, we need a deterrent. The deterrent, which was being put in place, has been scrapped by Keir Starmer.
So he would go back to the Rwanda plan?
He would go back to the need for a deterrent. In 2029, whenever the next election is, Rwanda may or may not be the right thing, but we do need a deterrent.
Is that the sort of thing that would interest you, Justine?
I think you've already lost the battle if all you've got in your immigration policy armoury is deterrent. The reality is, Joe, it's almost like we're living in Reform UK already. We've done what they wanted. We've left the EU. We have cut the aid that used to be invested in helping these people be able to stay in the refugee camps where they were in that region. We've now left the Dublin Convention that meant even if they made it here and crossed the Channel, we could automatically send them back to France. I think we need a grown-up discussion around how we can properly manage our borders, but also reduce immigration at source, but partly reduce it by investment in skills here, and that's a longer-term issue. It's not just a short-term, here's what we'll do over the course of the Parliament. You need short-term measures, but you need a much longer-term solution on immigration.
So, Harriet, try and persuade Justine Greening, who feels that you and the other contenders and supporters of those contenders are living in an Alice in Wonderland world.
But I don't disagree with anything that Justine just said. There's no silver bullet. There's not one thing which is going to solve the immigration crisis or anything like that. We need to have a look at how we have the security on the borders. We need to look at our skills and our welfare within the system. We can't have a welfare system and open borders because that attracts immigration in. So there's 101 things that need to be done and put into place. But Tom has been very clear for years that there needs to be changes to the ECHR to make it work better for the British people, because the point or the role of a leader of the United Kingdom is to get to whatever system works best for the British people, and that's what Tom is determined to do.
I mean, Justine, you were part of a government that also had 100,000 as its target. Presumably you supported that at the time.
Yes, and I think actually it's been the failure to have a sensible approach that's actually been able to work on the ground that's led us to where we're at. In a sense, you've ended up with the politics of populism seeping into British political life, and that's the point I was making just now. We've done those things that the populists wanted, and look where we're at now with sky-high immigration. The solution to all of these things, there are three parts of this in a sense. One is our asylum policy. The second is then immigration that is being sucked in through our economy. That is a long-term skills issue. That is a long-term technology issue. The issues faced by any business in Britain today is solved either by talent or by technology. We need a strategy on both of those things. Otherwise, frankly, you're not really going to succeed in having a long-term change, which is what we want.
I think what we need to remember with immigration is this is not just an issue that exercises people on the right. It exercises people from all parties. There's polls show that people who voted Liberal Democrat, who voted Labour, as well as people who voted Conservatives and Reform, all care about immigration. And one of the reasons why we did so poorly in the last election was because we lost trust, because we weren't delivering what we were promising. So this is not an issue of throwing red meat in any direction. It is a common concern across the UK. So something that we need to find a policy to work to.
I get that, but I think the much more profound issue facing Britain is weak access to opportunity. It's the fact that when I go back to my hometown of Rotherham, not enough has changed. They've had lots of new roundabouts, road investment, but for the fabric of opportunities for people who are growing up in that town like I did, it is not different enough. And so I think we are pointing our fingers, if you like, outside of us, whether it's Europe, whether it's migrants. The issues we've got are homegrown ones. They're about our economy, the extent to which it's creating opportunities and the extent to which those opportunities are really fairly open for everyone, and whether our education system is really helping people develop their talent, whoever they are, wherever they're starting.
Do you like what you've heard from any of the candidates?
I've not heard anything really of substance from any of them about how they are going to deliver, whether it's breaking down barriers, whether it's levelling up, whatever you call it. What have they got to say to a Justine Greening growing up in Rotherham today? I haven't heard that, and that's what I want to hear.
Well, let's have a look at this article in The Spectator. Katie, Tom Tugendhat's pitch. I'm a proper Conservative, honest gov. That
Great
sounds
headline.
like he might be trying to... It's a great headline. Might be trying too hard. Yes, go on.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question is, there are definitely some in the Tory party who think that Tom Tugendhat is almost dressing up a little bit as a right wing. I mean, some people also say that about Robert Jenrick, to be fair, because, you know, a few years ago he's seen as a bit more almost Cameroon. Now he's almost pitching himself to, you know, well, the question is who's more to the right of Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick. But I think certainly with Tom Tugendhat, when he first came out and he, you know, announced his leadership, and it was a Telegraph splash about the ECHR, and later it was clarified that he wasn't saying you should definitely leave the ECHR, saying reform it. Let's talk about later what happens if you can't reform it, wink, wink. But I think there was just a sense that lots of people just did not think that matched. I think Tom Tugendhat has long been seen as a one-nation Tory, but one of the issues I think he has had in this contest is it's second time for him. And he did lose some of the one-nation support the last time around, when all the one-nation lot got behind him, and then he didn't make it, and then he endorsed Liz Truss. Because lots of that group were seeing Tom Tugendhat as, you know, probably the preferred candidate, and their least preferred was Liz Truss. And I think that has meant that he's a bit harder to pin down in this contest. Right, was that a mistake, endorsing Liz Truss?
I wasn't even elected at that point. I don't know what his reasons were for doing that. I mean, there was two candidates when it got to the final two. They had to endorse one or vote for one. I wasn't elected at the time. I don't know.
All right, well, let's listen to something Liz Truss has been talking about in that question and answer session we mentioned earlier.
A lot of the problems we are facing now are as a result of us failing to turn things around. Yeah. You know, we failed to take on the Blairite, Brownite, statist orthodoxy. And the consequence is, first of all, we got the worst election result for the Conservatives since 1834. But secondly, the country is moving in the wrong direction. And I think we have to acknowledge that.
Justine, pleased to see and hear from Liz Truss?
Well, I think she can call us when the shuttle lands. I mean, frankly, it's astonishing that she's even here after such a disastrous budget that torpedoed any slim remaining hope that the Conservative Party had of winning the forthcoming election. You know, I'm staggered by the fact that there are any people in the party that still take Liz Truss seriously.
What do you think of her being here, Harriet? Has she got anything to contribute?
I think anyone who is a Conservative is welcome at a Conservative conference. But what I struggle with Liz Truss or other people is, I guess, a lack of awareness. So we have to realise that we lost the last election. Why did we lose the last election? Yes, there was many things that contributed to that, but it's impossible to say that the impact of the mini-budget and the period that Truss had in charge was not a contributing factor. We have to be alive to that. It doesn't mean that there has to be blame attributed necessarily, but we have to actually be able to look at ourselves, introspect, and be like, what went wrong? Why did it go wrong? And also be able to say, we were wrong from time to time, and it's okay to be wrong, but we have to learn from mistakes. And if mistakes were made, then we have to all work to correct them going forward.
Well, she isn't admitting that she made many mistakes, it's true to say. She apparently has just responded to a question by saying she would have won the last election if she had still been in charge. Do you agree with her?
We'll never know. We will never know. But what has happened at the last election is we now have a Labour government which is now falling to pieces quite quickly, and so it's our opportunity now to rebuild the Conservative Party as quickly as possible, as efficiently as possible, with a leader in place who will talk to the common ground of the British people and bring us to victory next time round.
What do you think of what Liz Truss has just said? The Conservatives would have won the last election if she'd still been in charge.
I'm not sure that the British people would agree with that. And I think we have to recognise that we've had a catastrophically poor election result. And, you know, Jeremy Corbyn got more than 200 MPs. We have got 121. Clearly, we need a dramatic change of course, not just to simply run against that political brick wall all over again. Well, what can you say? I mean, it just beggars belief that...
Well, the context she gives is actually about support for reform, in which she says it was lower when she was Prime Minister at 3%, whereas it rose considerably more during that election. And you, for one, think that the party should stop concentrating on trying to win that cohort of votes and move away and perhaps look at areas where the Liberal Democrats won, for example.
I think it should focus on a political strategy that is actually going to meaningfully, purposefully change lives of people on the ground. And I think almost stop thinking about, if you like, the political machinations so much. The bottom line is I represented a constituency in London, the youngest demographic constituency in the country. Average age of a voter was 37. But those issues around weak access to opportunity were the same as the community that I'd grown up in Rotherham. And actually, the challenge, I think, for the Conservatives is the last several years we have had what I would call a negative political coalition. It has been fusing people together on what they didn't agree on. The only time you really change things in politics is when you build a positive coalition. You get people behind where you want to go. So the question is, where do we actually want Britain to go? People are voting for system change. We've had some dramatic election results, dramatic referendum result. People don't want things to be just a bit better. They want them to be a lot different. We have to set out what I would think would be a cathartic agenda on equality of opportunity, and that's how we reinvent the party.
Harriet?
I think if we look at where the votes went in the last election, even if we won back all the votes that went to reform, we still wouldn't have enough to have a majority. It would still be a hung parliament. Most people did not vote for reform. They did not vote for Conservatives, obviously. They did not vote for Liberal Democrats. Over 25, or about 25% stayed at home. There are so many disenfranchised people in this country which we need to get back, because everyone should feel the need to vote and want to vote actively. And we need to be the opposition party that gives people a reason to be engaged in politics again, to see that politics is working for them again, and to see that it is actually in a place where they can be served going forward. And that is what we need to do with our new leader.
Pippa, what do you make of Liz Truss's intervention in that question and answer session?
Well, I'm sure they were accused right round the block for people wanting to go and see her, because it would have been a spectacle. And I'm afraid that she's not really taken seriously as a political voice anymore. I think that the fact that she thinks that they could have won the election under her shows that she is less self-aware than even we had thought. And I think the danger here, I mean, I'm old enough to have covered the Conservatives in opposition before, and it's all the same patterns repeating. That they lose badly, they pitch to the right, they think that that's where that's what the part of the base they need to shore up.
Is that what Tom Tugendhat is doing too? As someone who, Katie has said, is usually synonymous with the sort of One Nation group, perhaps the sort of area in mainstream politics that Justine would support, or is he trying to do a bit of a Keir Starmer?
I think there's a generous interpretation and there's a cynical interpretation. And I think the generous interpretation is that he recognises, as a sort of a centrist in the Tory party, that he also needs to appeal to the right, particularly if he's going to win. The cynical interpretation is that he's doing it specifically to win over the membership and then pitch back to what is his more natural position, and probably electorally a wiser strategy, which is trying to sort of have the whole broad Conservative Party coalition, which encourages the Lib Dems, or people that went to the Lib Dems at the last election, to come back to you, but also people on the right, and recognising that actually it's about presenting an option from the centre, and that's where you win from. David Cameron got it in 2005. I don't see any of the candidates really getting it probably this time round.
You often focus on the electorate in front of you, and as Keir Starmer shows, you can change tack. I just think on Liz Truss's reform point, I mean, the biggest factor in reform success was the return of Nigel Farage. And that didn't happen under Liz Truss. But I don't think he was Prime Minister particularly played a role in that. And you shouldn't focus too much on groups, but as reform is now taking some votes from Labour and is holding pretty steady in the polls, I don't think you can completely ignore it from conversations. It shouldn't be the dominant thing, but it's still a factor.
All right, is he taking to the right, Tom Tugendhat? We only have a few seconds left.
No, and as I've said, Tom has been talking about these policies. It's not sort of as people were saying, we're talking about if you're being generous or cynical. This is actually what Tom is saying. He has always been cynical of the ECHR and talked about the need to reform it.
All right.
That's not new for this election. He works in the common ground because that's where the British people are, and that is why he will be the best leader of our party.
Thank you to all of my guests for joining me today. It's the first day. We'll be back tomorrow, of course, with more Politics Live.